Hello and welcome to the EPRS Chronicle on mapping the cost of non-Europe. My name is Lauro Panella and I'm the head of the European Added Value Unit. In the first episode of the Chronicle, my colleagues introduced the concept of cost of non-Europe and its economic and practical implication as found in our recent study that you can see here. We also saw how joint EU action has benefited the European Union and its citizens in the past. In this episode, we look at some of other policy areas that traditionally fall within the competence of the European member states, such as health, labor and social policies. Together with my colleagues Cecilia, Navarra and Christa Kammerhofer-Schlegel, policy analyst at the EPRS, we will see which could be the advantages of joint EU action in these areas. Welcome, Cecilia.
Thank you.
Welcome, Christa.
Hello.
Let's start first from Christa. The fight against the COVID-19 pandemic showed us what can we achieve when the EU acts together and jointly. But what can we learn more from the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yes, thank you, Lauro. Indeed, we have learned a lot from the COVID-19 pandemic. But however, the COVID pandemic has shown also that there is room and a demand for more EU action. For example, the EU has been key in coordinating cross-border healthcare measures over the past 2 years by ensuring that patients and doctors could be transferred to hospitals in neighboring countries, but also in supporting the rapid development of vaccines against COVID, and also in supporting the joint purchase of medical equipment and affordable vaccine for all European citizens.
What about the cost of non-Europe in the area of health policy?
The joint purchase of COVID vaccine showed that pooling resources together across EU countries can facilitate access to cheap and new medicines for everyone. But we could also broaden the scope beyond the vaccines and develop a strategy for joint procurement for all pharmaceutical products, for example. And this would allow EU countries to pay less for pharmaceuticals, and at the same time it would ensure equitable access to medication for everyone of the European citizens. All this together would generate an additional 14 billion euros per year, in addition to gains of 17 billion euros for joint procurement of medical equipment, and in addition to another gain of 3.5 billion euros for working together at prevention.
Cecilia, what other policy areas would benefit from more EU action?
Thank you, Lauro. Well, indeed, there are many other policy areas that where greater EU action could lead to important social outcomes and economic benefits. If we sum up the potential economic gains in the area of employment and social policy, including in addressing inequalities and discrimination in the labour market, we reach a potential economic gain of more than 550 billion euros per year, which, just to give you an idea, is about the size of the Belgian GDP. This could mean, for example, minimum wage policies, social policies including support for minimum income schemes, a more ambitious use of structural and investment funds, or actions to promote the social economy, just as examples. Again, here, the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic tells us that more can be done. The SURE mechanism, for example, that supports tool in EU countries to counter the rise of unemployment has proved very important in reducing the negative impact of the pandemic. And if we compare the rise in unemployment during the financial crisis in 2008 and in the current in the COVID crisis, we can see actually that.
You mentioned poverty and inequality. This affects the EU citizens across national borders, but can you tell us more on this?
Yes, of course. Unfortunately, poverty is still a reality in the EU, and there is room for greater EU action to fight poverty and inequality. Currently, about 17% of the EU population is falling below national poverty lines. And this is strongly linked with increasing inequalities both within and between countries. Poverty affects both unemployed and employed people. Having a job is not a guarantee against poverty. And as we saw in an EPRS chronicle on care work, women are more likely to work low-paid jobs. The majority of minimum wage earners are women in the EU, and this shows that inequality is actually intersectional.
The study finds that addressing the overcoming inequality can lead to economic gains. This may be a provocative affirmation, so how did you get this conclusion?
Indeed, what we find is that inequality, besides being a problem in itself, also comes with an economic cost. Gender inequalities in the labor market, for example, are costing us over 153 billion per year in terms of foregone labor income, lost participation in the labor market, improper valuation of some professions, for example, care work, foregone tax revenues, just to name a few. There is also a cost of human capital. Failing to properly integrate migrants in EU labor market and to eliminate the discriminations that they face result, for example, in overqualification and inefficient allocation of human capital, as economists define it.
Christa, critics may say that more EU could come at the expenses of national member states' power or competencies and so on. Can you say more on this? Is it true, this statement?
Of course, there might be criticism, but the study shows that the contrary might be the case. For example, all the initiatives taken by the EU to respond to COVID could bring even more benefits for EU countries if they are formalized and if they were applied in a broad manner for future health crises and beyond. For example, there is potential to achieve greater budget efficiency by consolidating healthcare expenditure at EU level, and there's also potential to promote health diplomacy and coordination at international level. So all this action together would lower costs, would ensure better and fairer access to medicines. It would lower inequalities, including gender inequalities in access to medicines, and it would improve people's health within the EU, but also globally. So it shows that EU countries and individual citizens would benefit from targeted and rapid EU actions.
Thank you, Cecilia. Thank you, Christa.
Thank you, Lauro.
Thank you, Lauro.
The European Parliament has been very vocal in calling for a European health union, improved social protection or better employment rules, among other social policies. More EU action can benefit public health and social cohesion, as well as fight against inequalities and poverty in the European Union. In the third episode of these Chronicles, we will speak about the cost of a non-Europe in the twin digital and green transitions, two of the biggest future challenges. Don't miss it.